Hello, welcome to Beth Am. If any of you are from out of Beth Am, I think most of you are probably from Beth Am. My name is David Saunders, and I'll be the speaker today with Richard Emery. Very happy to have everyone here, and we're just getting started. We have some guests from different organizations, which we're happy to see, and you can see a list of them here. Including the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, Interfaith Power and Light, CCAN, and Civic Works. And this is part of the Beth Am environmental team, which is led by Stuart Steinman, who's the chair. So here's what our plan is today. I'm going to do a little introduction. Then Richard is going to talk about the risks in climate change. Then we'll have some questions and answers. And then I'm going to talk about actions that we can take regarding climate change, the actions you can take if you're a business, government, or nonprofit, and then what you can do at home. That'll be the final section. And we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, how to electrify your home, and then how to take action and join a solar farm. We'll have questions and answers also at the end, and then a special closing. So at Beth Am, I've taken the Wise Aging class, and that actually had an influence on my getting involved in climate change. We went through a little exercise, and part of that exercise was to have a conversation and think about the question that I kind of looked at was, I've been working for almost 50 years. Do I still have an obligation to mankind? And what do you all think the answer is to that question certainly from a Jewish perspective? And the answer is yes, we do have an obligation to mankind. And we call that Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. And that is my Wise Aging class. I was in the Wise Aging Olive group. And from that, and also from my contact with Richard Emery and reading his book, which I'll talk about in a minute, I then took these classes at the Association of Climate Change Officers. And the reason I'm bringing them up is because some of you on the call, on the Zoom, might be interested in professional development. And if you are, I would recommend this group. And the Association for Climate Change Officers is one that allows you to earn a professional certificate. It's called a Climate Change Professional, CCP. The bar is really not that high for certification. The program is supported by the state of Maryland. So that's something, and I'm going to put that in the chat a little later on. So in looking for a Jewish perspective on this, I came across this area, and it basically talks about, this is in Deuteronomy, when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it. So this is obviously a quote from the past. But what are we talking about? We're talking about a parapet. I see a lot of people are still joining us. Maybe we started a little too soon. For those of you who are still joining us, we're in our introduction. And we have a biblical quote that we're describing here. And the parapet is a wall around the roof of your house. In the old days in Jerusalem, people used the roofs a lot. It's hot there, and not as hot as it's going to be in the future. But so this is the parapet around the roof. So Rabbi Ariel Carmel said, the mitzvah of the parapet includes taking the utmost care of anything in your domain. So he's saying we're responsible for a broken staircase. If you look at the commentaries, they'll talk about weapons, that we have to be responsible for weapons. Objects that are left at the edge of the roof, which might be blown down in a normal gust of wind. The Torah does not allow a responsible human being to hide behind the fiction of a corporation. So this is a fundamental mitzvah that we can take as a jumping off point for looking at climate change. So another part of my journey into climate change was this book that Richard wrote that he handed to me one day. I don't know, Richard, may have been when we were at the swimming pool. Richard and I both live in the village of Cross Keys. And this book had an influence on me. And as I introduce Richard, I'm going to tell you a story from this book. Richard, as a young attorney, was working for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And while he was there, a giant ship came into the inner harbor and was polluting the inner harbor. The Coast Guard was there, calls were made to the owners in New York, but the pollution continued. So Richard, together with some other attorneys, got together and they got the park police, who had a little boat. And the park police were instructed to go to this giant container ship, climb aboard, go to the conning tower, find the captain, put him in handcuffs, and take him to the jail in Annapolis, the Annapolis City Jail. And that's what they did. And soon after that, the pollution stopped. So that was Richard's introduction. And then Richard went on to become one of the top lawyers at the EPA involved with crimes of pollution. So Richard, I'm going to get your slides up and you can start saying hello.
Well, hello, everybody, and so nice to be invited. I should just explain that the states have concurrent jurisdiction over their contained waters and indeed 3 nautical miles off a seaward beach. So we had as much jurisdiction as the feds did. And that kind of surprised the lawyers for the International Shipping Company because they wouldn't return our phone calls until we arrested the captain. And then suddenly the suits were from New York were on the Amtrak to Baltimore and then down to Annapolis. And sometimes you have to get people's attention. Well, anyway, I'll just say that after being an assistant attorney general for the Department of Natural Resources, and that meant I was a statewide prosecutor of polluters in Maryland, I became a Fed in Washington. After about another 10 years, I was briefly our nation's top lawyer for all EPA investigations of pollution crime around the country, and I had about 150 federal special agents. The badge on the cover is mine, but I wasn't a special agent. It's an honorary badge that was given to me. And in fact, it's let me see, it's right there on that plaque above my finger. So I can't wear it and impersonate an officer. It's affixed to a plaque. And the last 17 years of my career, I worked internationally for EPA, helping other nations wanting clean air and clean water. And I started seeing climate change coming 30 years ago. So let's get right into this. The first slide, David, is humanity as we see it began only about 250,000 years ago. Since 500 million years ago, when life in its simplest forms began on Earth, there have been 5 mass extinction events caused by natural climate change. Now, you all remember Yogi Berra, and I suppose we all love this folksy philosopher. And I quote, he said, "The future ain't what it used to be." And how right he is. You may or may not know that already now we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth. Some of these pictures will illustrate it. What we're doing to the next 3 pictures are what are collectively called charismatic megafauna, but they're many much smaller and less interesting forms of life are being wiped out at about 1,000 times the natural rate. And this is being done by our most invasive species, which of course is us. Man-made global warming is extinguishing the polar bear, and they cannot catch seals when there's no ice, and we all know the North Pole is melting. How ironic, really, is that a major cause of heat on the North Pole is unnatural, meaning man-made synthetic chemicals, the refrigerants in our air conditioning equipment. So to stay cool in our homes, we're killing off the polar bears in their home. So a book about this, and I highly recommend, is by Elizabeth Colbert, The 6th Extinction and Unnatural History. And from the title, you can surmise that the extinction now is the first and the first unnatural extinction. And if completed, it will be the first and last man-made extinction, because we won't be here to cause any more. Uh, you must read my book. She's a delightful author, and her book. You must read her book, I should say. And but its relationship to my book is that she showed me her technique, and like me, she's not a scientist, but she showed up at these most remote outposts of science around the world. She said, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth Colbert. I'm from the New Yorker. I'm going to write a book about you. You'll be a chapter. Show me everything. I like to get dirty. Let's go sample in the field. Let me see your lab, and I'll take everything back and write it up, and you'll get a free copy of my book." So, uh, so she showed me how to include adventures in my book, despite so much frightening science also in both our books. The picture next shows the four horsemen of the apocalypse: plague, famine, war, and death. I really only have about four takeaways for you in this short talk to probably to scare you into action. The first takeaway is this: humanity is on a path to participate in the sixth extinction now happening. And from the geologic record and the biochemical dynamics of this, you can ask me about it if you want. I'm not going to go into it, but they're well covered in this next book by Peter D. Ward. Next slide, David, entitled Under a Green Sky. And I'll read the subtitle in text in case you can't read it. Global Warming, the Mass Extinctions of the Past, and What They Can Tell Us About Our Future. Past extinctions were caused by magma from the Earth's core, burning up through coal and oil already underground, erupting as lava volcanoes and emitting too much CO2. And this created hydrogen sulfide, the deadly gas that repeatedly has wiped out most life on Earth. And today, with our business as usual, burning fossil fuels, there's no reason to think that the Earth's future will not be like the past. Why would geologic history not repeat itself? And as for the timing, it could be that our great-grandchildren will complete the man-made sixth extinction as a mass suicide in the next century. Now, for your second takeaway, can you read the sign on the bridge, time to buy a new home? Well, that's a good question, because during the lives of our grandchildren, the everyday street flooding will be so bad as to begin to shut down our seaports and cause our descendants to begin to abandon vast coastal areas and all our major cities at sea level. Superstorm Sandy 10 years ago ruined these New York cabs. It's just a hint of what's coming. And catastrophic ocean flooding is now inevitable, you might say, baked in, because the last time CO2 was at today's level of more than 420 parts per million was 3.5 to 5 million years ago, when the sea was 65 to 85 feet higher. So geologic history, why would it not repeat itself? It indicates it's probably too late to prevent the loss in the 22nd century of much of coastal America. And this risk has doubled during the last 40 years while coal and oil companies covered up the scientific facts known to them, just like the tobacco companies did before them to keep us smoking and dying. And this picture shows if we melt all the ice on Earth, and I'm not predicting that, but if we melt all the ice on Earth, the sea will rise 220 feet. And this shows you what America will look like. And it's amazing how far up the Mississippi River the sea will go. Well, again, in the words of that famous folksy philosopher, Yogi Berra, and I quote, "You can observe a lot by just watching." And this book by my friend John Englander, who's an oceanographer living in Boca Raton. By the way, I'm down here in Palm Beach County. We're riding out a hurricane tonight. Fortunately, it's coming ashore just north of us. But John Englander in Boca, he's been watching, and he assembled this helpful chart that covers 425,000 years that shows that CO2, heat, and sea level rise all rise and fall together. And on the extreme right side, it shows all three lines jumping up since the last ice age, which lasted about 10,000 years. And you see the green line going literally off the chart. Uh, this is what we've been doing. Uh, and CO2 naturally stays in the air and the sea for at least a millennium, 1,000 years or more. So this chart shows that catastrophic sea level rise is now inevitable. Temperature rise lags a decade or two behind CO2 rise, and sea level lags a century or two. But in geologic time, this is a simultaneous concurrence or synchronicity. So very soon, our big cities on the coast will be drowning. Your third takeaway is that this already terrifying geologic record based only on CO2 emissions cannot tell us exactly where and when we will get to where we are going. Now, Yogi Berra, each takeaway has a yogi quote, also said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. I think he also said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Oh my gosh, let me undo this phone. Oh, my wife got it. Sorry about that. So the geologic record of CO2 does not cover refrigerants that we recently invented to kill polar bears. It does not cover industrial agriculture emitting nitrous oxide, fracking and methane, and thousands of miles of leaking pipes in old cities are not part of the geologic record. So all of these powerful man-made or man-released chemicals are climate killers. The rate of man-made climate change now is 50 to 100 times the natural rate that's ever been observed in the past, and it is accelerating. So we are stumbling in the dark very soon to what might be called a climate cliff or a tipping point of no return. Your fourth takeaway is that nature has turned against us. Now, you might say that Mother Nature is angry with us, her bad children. Now, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, scientists say that our gross negligence has activated feedback loops that amplify natural forces and accelerate the coming change that will take us to the tipping points or over a climate cliff. Now, what am I talking about? Well, most obvious is the feedback loop between drought and forest fires, making more CO2, making more drought, and making more forest fires. We all understand that. You certainly would if you lived in California. But here are three more, and this first picture illustrates the first one. As seen here in Siberia, global warming, most heat goes to the Arctic, by the way, but global warming from the warming of the Arctic melts the tundra as well as the sea ice and releases methane, which is also known as natural gas, to leak and even erupt, making deep craters. Now, we've melted the Arctic's reflective ice cover. So now in a feedback loop, the warm sea naturally warms nearby land, melts the permafrost and releases natural methane, which is a far more powerful climate killer on a per molecule basis than CO2. The second natural feedback loop that is spiraling out of control is in Antarctica. This picture only shows the Totten Glacier. It's the biggest one, but I'm more interested in West Antarctica, where there are about 6 glaciers: the Pine Island Glacier, the Thwaites Glacier. You may have heard some of them, but they're standing at about 1,500 feet of water on the rock, and they're about 2 miles high of ice standing in the sea. And believe it or not, even the deep water is undermining them. And if they lose their grip on the land and just go bloop into the sea, it's not like sea ice melting. It's ice coming off the land. That will be enough to drown all the world's seaports. Scientists call the Thwaites Glacier the Doomsday Glacier, it's got enough to melt. It calls 2 feet of sea level rise, and that is a great concern. Just discovered in the last few years that even the warm water is undercutting these glaciers' grip on the land. The next feedback loop is black soot. Now, this is a picture from Greenland, and this is just filth from our ordinary air pollution that makes Greenland's ice less reflective and speeds the melting. Scientists call this a low albedo effect, as ice absorbs sunlight and speeds the melting. And of course, as the top ice melts, it produces more pollution going back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, and it gets darker and darker. If all the ice on Greenland goes, we'll get 20 feet of sea level rise. Well, that's really it for me. I don't particularly like to give a talk about a problem without suggesting solutions, but that would take another 20 minutes. So I'm going to just leave it there, and I hope I've achieved getting your attention, and I'll turn it over to David.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, that was our intro. And usually when Rich and I do this talk, we scare them to death, and then I come in with some solutions. So we're going to pause now and take some discussion, and then I'll come in with actions we can take. So what we're going to recommend is that if you would like to speak, to raise your hand or to use the hand raise symbol, and we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and we'll have some discussion for about 10 minutes. So Stuart, you want to start off?
Yeah, thank you. What has truly impressed and scared me with climate change is not just the sea level rise and coastal flooding, but a whole slew of natural disasters which we've at rates that we just never encountered, like droughts, floods, wildfires, diseases, plant diseases, because of cold winters are no longer killing off parasites and insects. So deforestation. And I thought at one point that I could list all of the impacts from climate change, but it's boundless.
It's really interesting you say that. I include in one of the talks a graph of tornadoes, and it's two lines. It's one line that's going down. The line that's going down are the number of days in the United States of America where there's only one tornado. And then there's a line that's going up, and the line going up are days in the United States where there are 30 tornadoes. But the kicker to me is that, and then I have 3 photos. The photos are all tornadoes that are driving distance from where we live in Baltimore. So we've now had tornadoes right nearby. Usually we think about tornadoes, we think about, the Wizard of Oz, Kansas, but actually we've had them in Maryland now.
David, I'll just say that 85% of the tornadoes in the world occur in the United States.
Oh.
And I like to think this is God's special punishment for all the CO2 and other chemicals we've released on the world.
The thing about tornadoes that impresses me is is it the only natural disaster or weather extreme that has occurred in every state. So yeah, you think of the Midwest tornado alley, Oklahoma, the Midwest, But as you said, Maryland and every other state has had, or at least the lower 48 has had a tornado.
Deborah? Unmute. Deborah, unmute,
I'm here.
please.
Do you
had a
hear me?
question? Yes.
I have a statement. Richard, in the Jewish religion, we say prayers for the dead. And I think we all ought to learn our mourner's Kaddish unless Richard comes up with something brilliant. This is terrible news. And it sounds like the tiger is at the door. That was my statement.
Well, I'll just say that, about a year and a half ago, I wrote a letter to the Atlantic magazine, and they said they would publish it. And I was responding to somebody who'd written about geologic history. And I said, human extinction is coming into sight in the 23rd century. And Atlantic magazine, which is a very responsible magazine, I'm pretty sure some of you know it, it's been around for over 100 years, said, well, our fact checkers have one problem with what you wrote. You said human extinction is possible in the 23rd century. And our fact checkers say human extinction is possible in the 22nd century, which is the next century, because we're now in the 21st century. And I said, well, I mean, don't call me an extremist or a radical. I mean, if your fact checkers say that, who am I to argue? And of course, I'll accept the change. So you'll publish my letter, which they did.
Yikes.
Anyone else want to jump in here, or we'll go on to the solution phase? And one part of the solution phase, I'll just mention it came up in the discussion of which we're gonna probably have a little later on of the COP 27, is that if the world had not taken what little action we've taken has made a difference. So the prediction is now that the world could get to 2.8 by the end of the century, where if we hadn't taken any action, it would have gotten to 4 degrees centigrade. So there actually is, we've actually helped in the last 20 years. We've made some progress, which we can talk about as we a little later on. Okay, let's just jump in. It's a little hard act to follow, but I'll now talk about how we can deal with this and some approaches to this. Let me get the right slide. Okay, so here we are in our agenda for tonight. We've talked about introduction risks. We have a couple of questions and answers. Now, some actions you can take. And the actions, this is basically, my part of Richard's talk. When we've given I mentioned to you that Richard and I have given 20 talks up to now. This is actually our 20th talk. And and in the talk, Richard talks about not only what he did just now to scare you, but then talks about policy and policy issues. I give a talk that's more about what businesses, or government, or nonprofit organizations can do. And this what I'm going to present to you is basically the curriculum that I learned in my classes at the Association for Climate Change Officers. And actually, it's also called the Maryland Climate Academy. It has another name for it because the Maryland government actually supported this effort in this educational process, which is ongoing. So you'll hear these words over and over again: strategy, adaptation, mitigation, reporting, and opportunity. So I'll explain each of these and put them in context for you. In terms of strategy, when I started out doing work in the quality field, senior management and Wall Street were kind of the enemies of quality. But now, if you look at climate change, people like, here's Larry Fink at BlackRock. And this is an organization that has $7 trillion under management. So it's a huge, huge organization with great reach. And this is his letter. He says, every management team and board will need to consider how climate change will impact the company's stock. So my observation is that Wall Street and the investment community is really pushing ahead on this. My wife gave me an article when the previous guy was president, and there was an article about drilling in Alaska in Parkland, and it was stopped. So why is the fossil fuel industry not doing this drilling? What stopped them? Were there, Eskimos that chained themselves together? Were there protests? No, it was the banks. The banks said to the fossil fuel industry, we're not going to give you $3 billion to do more drilling. We'd rather spend money on wind turbines and other things. So there definitely, in my view, has been some movement in the investment community, maybe certainly not enough. So first step is strategy. Second step is called adaptation. Adaptation is how do we protect our vulnerable assets? So how do we protect what we have? So here's Cambridge, Maryland, flooded. Here's another flooded street, and this is sea level rise. So what is the adaptation for sea level rise? And there's a plan in Cambridge, Maryland, to build seawalls. This is the design of a seawall. This is an adaptation to build a seawall to protect the shoreline and the coast. And actually, when I was doing the research for this, I had looked for Cambridge, and I started seeing these designs for Cambridge. And I thought, wow, these are really pretty sophisticated designs for Cambridge, Maryland. Well, it wasn't Cambridge, Maryland. It was Cambridge up in the Boston area, where they're much more sophisticated in doing designs like this. But this is an example of adaptation. Here's another example of adaptation. If you go to the Eastern Shore in the summer, you'll see my family go to Fenwick, and my neighbors, they have done this. Their air conditioning units are now on the one flight up. Their hot water heaters are one flight up, because this is the area that is the potential floodplain. So this is an adaptation, doesn't stop it, but it protects the asset. I gave a talk for my sister's show in California, and it was not hard to find this chart, which is how to build a house and protect a house from forest fires and from brush fires. And you can see here, they talk about defensible space. So having a house with 100 feet of defensible space around it to protect against forest fires and brush fires. So this is also adaptation. So 1 is strategy, 2 is adaptation, and then 3 is mitigation. Now, mitigation is how to lower the greenhouse gases, how to lower our carbon footprint. Obviously, one way is to use these alternative renewable energies like the wind turbine and the solar farm. So as I was taking these classes, one of the things that just astounded me was this idea. We have CO2 from burning coal. Coal is 78% carbon. If you have 1 ton of coal, which is 2,000 pounds of coal, and you burn it, you end up with 2.86 tons of carbon dioxide. Like, how does that work? I just couldn't understand it. You have carbon dioxide, you burn carbon dioxide, and you have ash. You have nothing. There's nothing there. So what does that mean? So I did some more exploration on this, and I found out that carbon has an atomic weight of 12. Oxygen has an atomic weight of 16. Carbon dioxide is a carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. So it has an atomic weight of 44. Who knew that carbon dioxide had weight? And here it is. It has an atomic weight of 44. Now, what does this actually mean, and how would it apply to us? Well, in the classes I took, I learned to do this computation. I learned to take therms, which is on all of your BGE bills, your gas, your natural, quote, natural gas is displayed as therms. And I learned to do the calculation to convert 1,026 therms into CO2. And it astounded me to learn that 1,000 therms, which is about $650 of natural gas, creates 5.6 tons, metric tons of CO2 equivalent that goes into the atmosphere for 100 years. And here you can see what it looks like. It looks very harmless. It's just this white smoke on all of our houses, all over the United States, all over the world. We're burning natural gas. We have these nice little white smoke, but that is the greenhouse gas. So what does it actually mean? So if you think of 1800 before the Industrial Revolution, the sun would send a photon to Earth, and some of it would be absorbed by the ocean or by the landmass, and a good deal of it would bounce back harmlessly into space at 1800. Now we come to 1900. 1900, we've been burning coal for 50 years for the Industrial Revolution. A photon comes, it'll still bounce back. But by the year 2000, a photon comes. As it bounces back, it could hit one of these CO2 molecules. Now, a molecule, when it heats up, it vibrates. So the photon will hit the molecule will vibrate and could throw off that photon either harmlessly into space or throw it back to Earth. And when it comes back to Earth is what we call the greenhouse effect, which creates the climate change. Now we go to the year 2020. Now we have fracking, and fracking has created a new molecule, methane. Actually, not a new molecule, it's what natural gas is, methane. But the molecule in the atmosphere is now CH4, and it's coming from all sorts of sources, as Richard just showed you, either from the Earth itself. So what happens now is this process is accelerated. A photon comes from the sun, it bounces back, it hits the CH4, it vibrates, it's thrown back, and it comes back down to Earth. And as a result of that, we have now CO2 in the atmosphere. And this is that chart that Richard showed you. He showed you the line going straight up because he was showing it over 1 million years. This is just from 2007 to 2020. And you can see that's right at the edge of this chart. It's that part of it. Global temperature is going up. As CO2 goes up, so does global temperature. They go up together. They go up together. The CO2 going up causes the global temperature to go up. So mitigation is how do we stop the burning of fossil fuel? So one type of mitigation is solar panels. So here we have Target stores. They're putting 500 solar panels on their stores. They're putting solar panels on their stores, on their warehouses, and we're seeing more and more of that. And before we leave tonight, I'm going to show every one of you how to join a solar farm so everyone here can have be using solar energy. Now, another method is regenerative agriculture. And I'm putting this up as a mitigation because using regenerative agriculture, it involves compost, cover crops, crop rotation, a reduced till. The estimate is between now and the year 2050, we can actually remove 15 to 20 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere if we move towards regenerative agriculture in a serious way. And let me just break here for a second and tell you a little story. There's a book called Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. And he tells the story of a family it's a futuristic novel. So he's talking about the future, and it's almost like short stories. And he's telling a story about a husband and wife in India. And this is 20 years in the future. The wife sends a soil sample. She sees a sign, something about a carbon capture program. She doesn't really know what it is, but in the story, she sends a sample off. Her husband is not interested. She gets a booklet on how to do regenerative agriculture, doing cover crops, composting, crop rotation. She wants to do it. Her husband doesn't care about it. She pushes it. They're very, very poor. And in the story, one day a van shows up, an inspector arrives, and he's going to inspect their soil. And he inspects the soil and he gives them 5 carbon coins. Well, in this story, the world got together and started giving out carbon coins for carbon capture. It's sort of the opposite of what we've tried to do with the carbon tax. And the husband's not interested. He doesn't know what to do with these coins. The wife doesn't, she's not sure either. What am I going to do with these coins? She takes them into town and finds out that they're worth a fortune, like $5,000 a coin, which to them in the story is like $500,000 to them, or $100,000. It just changes their lives, and they realize that they're really doing a lot by growing in their farm, by actually capturing carbon would be a very good thing. So in this novel called A Ministry of the Future, that's a story that maybe someday we'll see more in the future. So that's a story about regenerative agriculture. That's what it's about. There are some really good films on it, and you can Google it. So that's mitigation. Another area is reporting. And reporting is very important for businesses. We see claims like this all the time. This is Target Stores. Our goal, committing to sourcing 100% of our electricity from renewable sources by the year 2030. Now, if they make these claims and they put this into their reports that go to the SEC, they have to back it up. So now companies are building out systems to report their carbon, their emissions, and this is becoming a whole mini industry. And certainly as part of the Paris Accord is being able to report what the emissions are. And the new administration in Maryland is going to have a challenge on its hands, Westmore's administration, because there are these reports due and plans due that are in the previous legislation that we're now going to be working on reporting. There's going to be more and more of this reporting. And actually in Washington, D.C., an apartment building like Harper House in Cross Keys would have to report on their CO2 footprint. And then the fifth is opportunity. And you can see here's a simple example, Target Stores putting in charging stations so customers can shop, they can charge their cars while they shop. And there is, and as I'm going to describe to you in a few minutes, there's plenty of opportunities in the new legislation. So that's the end of the talk for businesses. But you may say, gee, David, what kind of solution is that? You haven't really given me anything. I mean, what hope is there from what you just showed me? And I admit there really isn't much. So here is the next part of the talk. And this is the most powerful part that I've seen so far. And I'm just bear with me I'm going to just read this. In the run-up to World War II, President Roosevelt enlisted the entire US economy in an effort to scale up production of war material. All of the country's resources were bent to the task. In 1939, the US had 1,700 aircraft. But 6 years later, in 1945, we had 300,000 military aircraft and 18,500 B-24 bombers. So, I'm not quite old enough to remember this, but the whole country was focused on World War II, on war material. And we did it. We did remarkable things in this country to fight that war, and the entire country was mobilized. And that is what we need moving ahead. So this article comes from this fellow, Saul Griffith, who runs this organization called Rewiring America. And I'm going to introduce you to much of it now. His book is called Electrify. And what he's suggesting is that in World War II, when we talked about aircraft, we now have to think about wind turbines. We talk about Liberty ships. At one point, we were building ships 1 a week. We have to think of solar farms. When we think of communication, we have to think of the smart grid. And when we think of bullets, we have to think of batteries. And a battery and a bullet are basically the same. And I've got one of these wonderful, this is one of these rechargeable flashlights, gives a really bright light. And it has a rechargeable battery. And this is the battery of the future. It's called the 18650 battery is the new standard for rechargeable batteries. Can be recharged 1,000 times. And we're going to see more and more and more of batteries like this. This is the standard battery of the future. It doesn't even have a brand on it. It's just a generic battery, but we're going to see them branded by everybody. And a bullet and a battery basically are the same thing. It's a shell casing with energy. And we're going to get better and better at building batteries. So Rewiring America, they have been the brains behind the Inflation Reduction Act. Very quietly at the press conference that was announcing Inflation Reduction Act, the Rewiring America folks were there, and they were thanked, and they were at the table, and they had a big impact. And this is one of the documents. I'm going to give you access to this document. I'm going to give you the website to get this document. So now I'm going to walk you into what this is. So one aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act are called high efficiency electrification rebates. I believe it's going to be pronounced a HERA. So what is this? What are we talking about? In the past, the United States, for 40 years, we tried to tax carbon unsuccessfully. Canada taxes carbon. They've had a lot of success with it, but we can't do it. It's been blocked politically. So this new act is not a stick. In fact, it's a carrot. It says to the American people, if you electrify, the government will use government policy to make it easy. So how are we going to do it? Here's an example. This is from the training about the new law. So they give an example, they give some case studies, and this is something I'm going to make available to you. So here's a family of 4 with an income of $128,000 in Cleveland, Ohio. And how will the Inflation Reduction Act impact them? So here is a plan from 2022 to 2027. So it's a 6-year plan. And this suggests that over this 6-year, really over a 10-year period, this family can get $30,000 of climate change equipment installed. They can get discounts, tax credits, and only spend $10,000 out of their pocket. So this is an incentive. It makes it cheaper to replace equipment with the non-fossil fuel equipment. I'll just give you an example. I'll give you 2 examples. The first one, they say you can do right away, which I'm going to show you all to do today, how to buy clean energy, and your cost is 0. So that's the first step, is everyone to start moving over to clean energy. Now let me just show you another example. This family was using gas for their clothing dryer. For the clothes dryer in the house, they were using gas. And the new legislation is going to say, hey, instead of gas, use a heat pump clothes dryer. You've probably never even heard of that, a heat pump clothes dryer. Such a thing exists. So let's say it costs $798. They would actually get one of these HERA rebates, and the cost would be 0. So now how this is going to be administered, we don't know. The regulations haven't been written, but this is the intent of the law. So what would it actually look like? This is my imagination of what it would look like. You go to the store and there's a gas dryer there that uses fossil fuel. Let's say it costs $650. Then there's a electric dryer there, and it costs $425. Electric dryer, by the way, is basically like a toaster oven with a rotisserie. That's what an electric dryer is. A toaster oven with an electric coil and a rotisserie. It's better than gas. But then there is the heat pump dryer, which uses a whole different technology. And that could be more expensive on the front end to buy it. So I imagine that, and don't go to the store and try to do this. First, they're back ordered. We can't even, the manufacturers are just gearing up. Once this law comes about and got passed, the manufacturers are getting really busy ramping up to build these. So what it might look like in the future is there would be a rebate in the store, and instead of paying $750, you get this rebate depending upon your income, and the incomes are set pretty high. Like most people will qualify it. Some of these discounts are at 150% of the average median income, so it's set high. Then there are other ones for people on low income. So that's what it could look like. No guarantee, but that's what it could look like. Now, you may say, well, gee, this sounds great. Now I see there's going to be some rebates available over the next decade. And the whole idea is replacement, is that you do it as you replace your equipment, you replace it with a non-fossil fuel. So here's this book that I'm also going to give you the link for. It's written by Joe Rosenberg, who's at Rewiring America. And Joel's a neat guy. He went to MIT. I'm writing a paper with him. And this is from his book. And just follow along with me. I'm going to walk you through these different areas for your homes. The first one we said just now was the purchasing the renewable energy, and I'm going to show you all how to join a solar farm. The second element, and these are all described, these are chapters in this book, is to your electrical service. This is the box on your home. Most boxes are 100 amp. But if we're going to electrify, you may need a 200 amp box. So this would be the upgrade of the electrical box at your home. And that could cost $1,500, we saw in the previous chart, and that would also be covered under a rebate. The third, and this is a big purchase, is the heat pump. And now you may ask, how does a heat pump work? And someone may correct me on this, but this is my understanding of a heat pump. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but refrigerant boils at minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So what happens is you basically have this cycle, this piping in the heat pump, and it takes this refrigerant that is outside your house, and let's say outside, it's 20 degrees outside, but when it's 20 degrees outside, this refrigerant boils. It goes from a liquid to a gas because 20 degrees outside is cold to us, but for this refrigerant, it's hot. And the refrigerant boils, becomes a gas, goes back into the house. And in the house, there's a heat exchanger, and the heat exchanger gives off heat. So now there's heat in the house. And then the gas cools down. It's now kind of liquid, goes back into the pump, goes outside, heats up, comes into the house, gets a heat exchanger, gives heat in the house, becomes liquid, goes back outside, and it just becomes this cycle. It takes heat from the outside, brings it inside, heat from the outside, brings it inside, and it's running on a pump and a fan. And a pump and a fan is much more efficient, uses much less power than a gas furnace. The gas furnace, if you look at the gas furnace in your basement, it's like a jet engine of an F-15. I mean, it's zooming. So that would be a major improvement, is these heat pumps. That's the third one. It also applies to hot water heaters. You're going to start seeing this. They're not available yet. You're going to start seeing these hot water heaters. In California, 100 people got together for 6 months to look at this new hot water. Well, who were the 100 people? Well, they were installers, they were customers, they were utilities, and they were manufacturers, and they were regulators. And they got together and they worked on the architecture, the standards for a heat pump that could plug into a regular 120 volt circuit in your house. So that's coming. And the manufacturers, they're gonna build these out as fast as they can. And now number 5 is the electric cooking. People say, oh, I like gas cooking. Well, you got gas cooking. You're actually breathing in all sorts of chemical in from that gas. There was a YouTube at one of the conferences. They had Microsoft in their headquarters. They have a gourmet cook, and they installed a completely electric stoves for him, and they used induction heat and an induction wok, and he loves it. He demonstrated, he talked about it. So the electric cooking surfaces, induction heating, will be fabulous. The only problem you'll have is your aluminum pans won't work. You have to have a metal pot for it to work. Number 6 is electric clothes dryers. We talked about that already. Number 7 is electric vehicles. Some of you have them already. Number 8 is the chargers. Now, at page 62 of this book, they'll show you all the different configurations of the plugins and explain all that about plugins and configurations for electric vehicles. Number 9, solar panels. Maybe in the Q&A, we'll ask Richard about the solar panels on his house in Florida. And 10 are the batteries. A lot of progress being made on batteries. And I'm predicting that as the IRA comes out, the manufacturers will be just all over it. I have to laugh about this. You know, my daughter, she recently was going to change health plans, and she went on the Obamacare site. She said that she got so many phone calls, she literally had to turn off her phone. So many companies were on Obamacare. Well, it's going to happen like this. You put in home battery, you're interested in home battery, you'll get calls from 5 people. Now, this may take 10 years from now, but that's the plan, that the market is going to be driven by these incentives, by these financial incentives. Now, here's an example of a page from Joel's book. This is the item 1, purchasing renewable energy. And for each of those items I showed you, he says, how difficult is it? What's the upfront cost? What's the impact? Contractors, can you do it now? So I'm going to show you this right now. So this is Neighborhood Sun. This is a state program, a state of Maryland program. It's regulated by the state of Maryland, and it is part of legislation. And I'm going to take you to their website. So this is their website. Did that work? No, that didn't work. Wait a minute. Excuse me. I have to make a change. Sorry. Worker error. Okay. Now you can see their website. And in the chat, when we get to Q&A, I'm going to put this in the chat. So this is the website for Neighborhood Sun. Some of you may have seen this before, and it has all of the information about what the benefit is, benefit to the planet, all these buttons for how to get started, you know, an app and all of this. But what I'd like to take you to is the solar farm itself. So when clicking the solar farm, it gives us a choice, and we'll go to BG&E. And let's see what's offered in I assume everyone on the call is in the BG&E area. So in the BG&E area, there are 5 solar farms. Here's the one, Dogwood and Old Court Road. It's fully subscribed. This is the one that I'm in, is Henryton, which is out in Marriottsville, and that's also fully subscribed. White Marsh has some spaces open. Friendship is fully subscribed, but this is the one I'm going to direct you to. It has a little better deal than the White Marsh. And I know this is one they're really trying to fill by Thanksgiving. So let's learn more. So you can either hit this button, subscribe now, or you can go to this one, learn more. Let's go to learn more. So learn more, this is what a solar farm is. This is a 2.8 megawatt community solar project. It's located in Sykesville. It's called Rivers, and they just did that as a tribute to the many rivers that Maryland has. Maryland has a lot of rivers, so it's called the Rivers site. There's no cost to join. There's no fee to cancel, but you do need a credit score of 650, and I'll explain why that is. And it's open to all residents who pay an electric bill. And there's a 10% discount, which I'm going to also explain. So it's a regulated program. And the way it works is that your BGE bill has three parts. There's electricity, there's electricity, there's gas, and there's distribution. So it's three parts. So this is about the electric part. The other parts stay exactly the same. So when you go to this, you have to give your BGE number, and you give your BGE number because based on your electrical use, Neighborhood Sun determines how many solar panels you get, what percentage of the whole farm you would get. And the way it works is in the first month, you're producing electricity that goes through a meter and it goes into the grid. And that meter will then tell BGE how much solar energy you're basically selling to BGE. So let's say your panels produce $100 worth of energy. Well, BGE then on your bill gives you a $100 solar credit on your bill. So your bill goes down $100 in month one. In month two, you pay the solar farm $90. Now, why is that? Why can you get a $100 credit and pay $90? Well, the reason is that solar energy is much cheaper. You're selling solar energy at the same price that BGE is selling it to us, but solar energy is much cheaper than fossil fuel energy. It's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than gas, and it's cheaper than nuclear. So that's why there's a discount. But there may be a lag, but once it's running, it runs on automatic. I talked to Stuart, he's been using it for years and it works very well. So that's how that works. So let's see. So that is a solar farm. And let me now stop. And I think I'm coming to the end. I have to go back and check my slides. Okay, so we're now going to have some more discussion. Okay, so here's our agenda, and I'll show you where we are. We've done our introduction, we've talked about risks, we've had questions and answers, we've talked about business and government, and we've talked about the IRA, how to electrify your home, how to join a solar farm. Now we can have questions and answers from all of you. I'm going to put all of this information into the chat. I see we have some chats already.
David, this is Richard.
Yes.
Can I just interrupt?
Please.
I know it's not for me to be asking questions, but you might want to distinguish renewable energy certificates, which are scams that BG&E has been selling and participating in, from what you're talking about, because we don't want people to be tricked here.
Okay, thank you. So we're talking here about a solar farm, which is different than, here's an ad I have right in my hand from Inspire Clean Energy. Inspire Clean Energy, they're going to give me $100 gift certificate, and they're going to give me pricing for 3 months, and then who knows what's going to happen to the pricing. So there is something in Maryland called retail choice, which was actually a big mistake, and in the new legislation may actually be closed out. What happened is, years ago, energy companies came to the governor at that time, was Paris Van Deming. They said, hey, this is a great idea. We're going to have competition. We're going to let consumers compete. We're going to let companies compete for energy. And it was passed. And I actually can show you what it looks like. Let me see, I've got a slide right here. So let me just show you what it actually looks like. I'm going to just pull up a slide right now and show you what Richard's talking about. Can you all see this? You can see this slide. Richard, you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what retail choice looks like. The price at this point is 7.1 cents per kilowatt hour. This is the regulated price, the standard price. It's called the SOS, the standard offering service is 7.1. You've got all these companies here, Direct Energy, Reliant Energy, Exxon, Stream, Green Mountain. They're all owned by the same people. These are some folks in Texas. They own all these different companies, all these different names. And you can see what they're charging. The price is 0.071 cents per kilowatt hour is a standard SOS price. They're charging 0.93, 1. They're charging 31% more, 43% more, 55% more, 77% more, 78% more. So what happened is they allowed this retail choice. The companies came in, they sold it to people, especially poor people, and they sold it as, we're going to give you a discount. They give them a credit card. They give them a discount for the first 3 months, and then they ratchet the rate up every 6 months, every year, and they're called sleeper rates. And this has been a terrible scandal. It's cost Maryland probably $500 million. It's just a terrible scandal. But what they then did is they said, well, this isn't working anymore. Let's find another angle. So the new angle is, we're not going to promise lower cost. We're going to promise, what do you think, gang? What do you think they're going to promise? We're going to promise clean energy. They're going to promise clean energy. And how are they going to do it? And you'll see in their advertisements, they'll say 100% wind, but then they'll say in the small print, you'll get a renewable energy certificate, an REC. In the industry is called a REC, and it's called an unbundled REC, which they don't tell you. It's called an unbundled REC, which you wouldn't know what that meant. But they say in their advertising, a REC is not electricity. It is an attribute of electricity. But a long time ago, I don't know, Richard, 10 years ago, in one of the federal rules, there was a paragraph that said a company that uses RECs can claim that they're using renewable energy if the REC is certified. So then everyone got certified RECs, and then they made this claim. So the claim may actually be legal unless the law gets changed, but it's really misleading. So we're recommending don't do that, use the solar farm. And I have to tell you, I personally was a victim of that. And
I was a victim of it too.
And Richard was a victim of it too. So some come off mute. Let's have a little discussion now. Okay, Stuart, you've got your hand up, but we can use the raise hand function if you like. Stuart, can you come off mute? Can you do that?
Yeah, one thing that confuses me is that CO2 and methane, once they're emitted into the air, it stays there for a long period of time, years, decades. But yet I hear that if we reduce the amount of CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere, that we will see improvements or reductions in climate change somewhat rapidly. And that just seems inconsistent to me. It's my assumption is that we've already polluted the air with like over 420 parts per million, and we're seeing increasing disasters, and I don't see how I can't imagine how those rates of disasters are going to come back down.
I don't know why the idea that we're going to remove this carbon from the atmosphere
No,
It-
but the rate of emissions, if it starts coming down, say from 420 to the target of 350.
oh, well, I don't think anyone's thinking it's going to come down that much. But once it's in the atmosphere, it stays in the atmosphere for 100 years. The methane from my
David,
house stays in the
let's make
atmosphere
that
for 100 years.
1,000 years or
Oh,
more.
Richard says
For
1,000 years.
CO2, for methane, it stays maybe 100 years, but in the first years, it's on a per molecule basis, 100 times worse than a molecule of CO2. But methane goes out in about 100 years, but it's in the short term, which is really all we have left, it's far worse. And let's not forget also that 92% of the CO2 that we've put into the air has gone into the ocean. So we can take it out of the air, but then the ocean is going to begin emitting it back into the air. The only ways to remove it from the air are, with David mentioned, regenerative agriculture, planting trees, but there are these supposedly carbon capture methods. And there's a model going on in Iceland where they can afford to run it because they have geothermal. But to do that is going to take, I mean, unless you have vast amounts of renewable energy, you can't do it. And so that's why I'm as hopeless as I am. I'm sorry.
Stuart Schoenfeld, did you have a question?
I have a couple. So I'm impressed with what I've heard tonight about the science and about the possible responses in terms of policy. What I worry about are people. And I worry about two things. One is resistance and the other is resentment. I'd like both of you or either one of you to address this. By resistance, I mean this: people aren't necessarily bad people if they have problems with the transition to renewable energy. But for many people, it's a technology that is new and it gets in the way of the sense of their own control. There are many people who have the ability or had the ability, to tinker and to do things on their own. And this really seems to take that out of people's hands and makes them feel more dependent and more helpless. And the other part of resistance is that is the cost factor for people who are not upper middle class. You look at what the pricing for electric cars, and people who can't afford those cars look at the massive investments in putting up charging stations, and they say, this is it's my tax is going to benefit the rich, and that's a problem. How we get past that kind of thinking? I appreciate the chart you showed about how a house can transition. I think it's actually harder than that. Than that example showed in real time for people to make those changes. And then the other part about resentment has to do with international politics. Right now at COP27, there's a major push for the impoverished and becoming more impoverished countries to say, we're the victims. We're suffering from climate change, not because of anything we've done, but because of something that the rich countries have done, and they should pay up. And the rich countries are not anywhere near willing to buy that argument. So we get a very deep resentment around this issue. So would the two of you have anything to say about those two things?
Well, there is in the training I took, we had a class on these kinds of issues, and there was a study done of the characteristics of a study in America that's been tracked by Yale for a long time. And there are categories of early adopters, people sitting on the fence, and then there's a group of deniers, which are really a small group of people who deny that this is happening at all. Most people are along the lines from this survey that this could happen. How will it impact me? So when Rich and I give this talk, if we find someone who's an actual denier, we won't even get into a conversation with them. Maybe offline we would, but there's no sense of even discussing it. Richard, there's actually a fellow at the swimming pool. I pointed out to Richard, there's a fellow at our swimming pool in Cross Keys who's a denier. I had one conversation with him and he knew also never to discuss it again. And we would just never talk about it.
But
So
it's not,
there is,
yeah, my issue is
So
not
the-
with, it's with people. who feel-
okay, maybe I misunderstood it, with resentment about,
And-
let me just say about the financial part of it, if I could answer that from what I understand. I think that in the IRA, they tried very hard to balance it so that it's the incentives for poor people, people under 50% of the average median income, the incentives are much higher. And even on the solar farm that I've sent you, I've put the link on the chat, the incentive is higher. You know, we get a 10%, they get a 25%. So there is a definite intent. It's under the category called climate justice. It's a major, the legislation addressed it directly. They have a seat at the table. And you know, and it's a real thing in this legislation. I mean,
agree.
if you feel you're getting the bad end of the stick,
Yeah.
you have in this legislation, you have a seat at the table, and at the committees and advisory boards, there'll be a seat at the table.
Yeah, I agree. It's a real thing. I'm not yet convinced that the message has gotten out
Oh.
and that the people who need it are in a position to take advantage of it.
Agreed. Agreed.
If I can just raise one other policy possibility. I think about public institutions and solar panels on roofs, and I wonder, you know, if you gave the example of Target, make a business decision, but I wonder about legislation that would say all new hospitals, all new schools, all new public buildings should be electric and should have renewable built in as part of the architecture.
Yep, I think that's going to, I think we're going to start seeing that. In the Climate Solutions Now bill, there's a whole section about electric buses. I heard an interview with Kamala Harris, and she talked a lot about electric buses because there are like 500,000 school buses in America, and part of the IRA is aimed at the electric school bus. There are programs for electrification. So there is beginning to face it. I don't think any progress has been made, but it's, you know, if you say solar panels on public buildings, everyone, they'll listen to you, say, okay, yeah, how do we do that? You know, it's not a conversation that anyone would say, what are you talking about? No, they'll say, okay, how do we do it?
Yeah, but it's not happening. I think.
Oh, it's not happening yet. Oh, no, it's not happening yet.
When you had that chart comparing World War II to the ramping up of investments in renewables, I mean, this is one of the ways in which the government can leverage that.
This is what got the IRA passed. The fellows who made up that chart took it to the Congress, and they went to the Congress, said, look, we did this already. We did this in world. Those were the same people who wrote the IRA bill. I'll say one thing about, I'm sorry?
Would this be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about how some of how we're building grassroots power
Please.
for passing that kind of legislation?
Perfect. Thank you.
So so this has been really wonderful. I'm Joelle Novi. My brother Sam is a member of Beth, and I heard you had a great party at the polls last night. But I'm here tonight with Interfaith Power and Light, which has been working with congregations of many faiths to support, to help folks respond to climate change. And like I can hear on this call, and just seeing your faces and your questions, like this can be very lonely work, and it can be very dispiriting, and it's hard to know if anything we do can matter or if enough is happening. I'm here to tell you, first of all, that there are faith communities across Maryland where people are taking these things to heart and really committing themselves to respond with integrity and compassion to what they're learning about what's happening to our climate. But I also want to say that this very transformation you're describing, Stuart, electrifying our grid, shifting the grid to cleaner power, these are things that we can only do by coming together in a movement large enough to change the laws. And we can make these individual choices in our homes, but if there's still gas pipes delivering, leaking all over the place and delivering, a gas stove is leaking even when it's off. So long as that infrastructure is still there, we really need to build a bigger movement to change our whole system. So I'm actually going to encourage Evie to talk a little bit about some of the pilot work she's doing around electrifying homes in Baltimore, and imagining what that would look like. But I'm also going to put in the chat, this event is one of many conversations about climate that are taking place in faith communities across our region this fall. And we're inviting everyone who participates to speak out to our legislators about the need to, what we're calling it turning away from burning. And this is exactly what David was talking about. We have to move away from combustion. We have to stop burning anything to make our lives work, and particularly burning fossil fuels inside our homes. We really need to imagine a world beyond burning fossil fuels in our homes or for our electricity. So I'm going to put in the chat an action step that you can take online. The top one is actually for DC residents, and you'll scroll down to get to the Maryland one. But then I'm going to Evie's just doing really exciting and inspiring work to me about what electrification could really look like in our own communities. So I'd love to hear.
Great, Evie, please.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I came to this because I wanted to learn about this topic. It's a big area where we're learning and trying to implement as we go, and documenting what we learn and bringing it back. I literally just started an informal electrification collaboration group, and we had our first meeting this morning with organizations all across Maryland, trying to put our heads together and do better peer-to-peer exchange on this topic. So this is a really hot topic. Yeah, I'd say a lot of the conversations until now has been in the policy circles, and there's been some really exciting updates from the policy circles. And now we're getting to that point where service organizations and implementers are getting involved and trying to make this more easy, more affordable, and start spreading the word and making it accessible to individuals. And so again, yeah, I don't have all the answers to share today of what those lessons learned, but I just wanted to share that there are pilot projects going on. I'd say a lot of what David mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, is something we're all waiting on to see how those rebates are going to come down to Maryland. And in the meantime, we want to be prepared for that, and we want to be prepared to scale up on a larger scale and be able to help as many homeowners and residents as possible take advantage of those rebates. But it's hard to do so when the funding's not here yet. And so we've had to instead seek out, private sources of funding to just fund some of the initial early adopter programs. And then we can learn from those early adopters and be more prepared when the Inflation Reduction Act really becomes a reality and those rebates are here. And hopefully, so I guess one of my questions for those in the policy world is when we can actually expect that timeline of when those rebates and those regulations
the rebates
might come.
are only half of it. It's the manufacturers and
Mm-hmm.
the industry has to gear up.
Yeah,
When the
for
industry
sure.
gears up, they'll push it. You'll get rebates. You'll get Best Buy will have rebates. Amazon will have rebates. Costco will have rebates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a pilot project happening in Baltimore City at Civic Works. There's some pilot projects going on in Montgomery County as well through the Montgomery County government. Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is also doing some pilot projects. The goal is to, for reals, do some induction stove replacements in low and moderate income homes, do some water heater conversions from gas to heat pump technology, clothes dryers. David mentioned dryers to heat pump technology, and really document what the process is like, what to expect, so that we can set better expectations for individuals who go through that next. All the early adopters are being, we're working with them to compensate them for the extra time and all the extra efforts that they're making on being involved in these projects. And out of that, I mean, we're developing all sorts of new educational materials to make it even more clear of like, what is an induction stove? Why is it a benefit? Why is it awesome? I've been learning tons and tons about induction stoves. I've met with homeowners who have induction stoves. And it is, yeah, definitely my newest obsession. I would call out as that as my first thing that I'm going to be promoting more and more is induction stoves, because it's like one of the easiest ways I think will be to get involved in trying to convert from gas to electric. And yeah, the great thing about it is induction stoves are a win-win-win. You don't really need to make any sacrifices. I think a lot of the concern about moving from gas to electric was around cooking comfort and ease. And induction stoves don't have that problem. Quite the opposite. Induction stoves are better when it comes to cooking. They are more precise. They heat up really fast. And so it's like a win from a comfort and cooking ease standpoint, and it's a win from an energy efficiency standpoint. And then the biggest thing we haven't really touched on today yet is health and safety. It's a huge win from a health and safety standpoint. I've been doing energy audits where we do carbon monoxide testing for the past decade, and the vast majority of homes we come into have a carbon monoxide issue because of the gas in our homes, and those stoves are right in our living spaces where we are operating and living. And so that just the benefits around carbon monoxide, and just the number of kitchens that don't have ventilation. Most of the ventilation, if you have it, probably just sends the air around in your own kitchen and doesn't actually send it outside. So yeah, I think the health and safety message and really being clear about that is another big thing that's coming, and that coincides with the efforts to be more efficient and to address climate change. So
And
it all
Civic
goes
Works
together.
is really been a wonderful organization that's really made some good progress. So as we close out, we're about out of time. I'd like to make 3 points, then Richard's going to do the closing. One is that the Rewiring America approach says that we have the technology, the cutting, the wind, solar, smart grid, battery, we have all of that already. And if we implement it, we'll actually have an area where electricity will be so cheap it won't even be metered. That is the vision 25 years from now. Like, we'll have an abundance of electricity. The second hopeful is that if we can actually get regenerative agriculture on a big scale, we can actually start taking some of the carbon out of the atmosphere. The trees are not enough. They have business about 1 trillion trees. The trees take too long and they don't really draw enough out. But the soil has much more potential, but has to be scaled up, and it's nowhere close to that now. But it's possible to engage Mother Nature. And the third area of hope is we have people like all of you on the call, and people who care about this and are smart enough to recognize what is going on and what potentially is happening. And now Richard has kind of going to ask him to do the final word. Richard, do you want to explain what this is, our closing hymn, if you will?
Well, yes. Well, just when you thought there weren't any more Yogi Berra quotes coming from me, before I get to this sublime poem, I'd like to go to the ridiculous. And Yogi Berra, and you all know this one, he said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. You've all heard that. And actually, we need to walk back to the fork in the road that we passed by more than 40 years ago, when this problem was well known to scientists by 1979 or 1980. And so to conclude, moving from the ridiculous to the sublime, of the several poems in my book, I must confess I do like poetry. I will read this one. It's actually a verse in a Protestant hymn, but the poetry is ecumenical and universal. And it was actually written to oppose the US invasion of Mexico in 1845, but it was adopted by the abolitionists to oppose slavery. And here it goes. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth and falsehood for the good or evil side, some great cause, some great decision, offering each the bloom or blight, and the choice goes by forever twixt that darkness and that light. Well, that does it for me. I just want to say it's been a great pleasure, and I usually don't want to talk. I don't like to describe a problem without offering solutions, because if you do that, you're a whiner. And if you all want to talk more about solutions, we could do that some more too. When we have more time, sometimes I even talk for half an hour, and most of the time people manage to stay awake. But it's really been a delight seeing all my fellow Baltimoreans. I'm from Baltimore, and I would like to be, even though I'm not Jewish, a member of your temple, because I think it's probably one of the greatest organizations in Baltimore City. And I will just say thank you for inviting me and us tonight.
So thank you all very much. Thank you, Richard. And you all can copy the chat. There are Richard books that Richard recommended. The links are there. The link to the book on your home, Electrify Everything in Your Home from Rewiring America, is in the chat. If you go to the right, you can copy all of the chat and copy it into another document, and then you have all of the links. Also, if anyone is interested, you can contact me directly if you want any information, etc., or help with Neighborhood Son. If you have trouble signing on, contact me and I can walk you through how to sign on. I'm actually a solar advocate with them, so I can give you a little help with that.
Yeah, he taught me to do it. And I think I was your second person, and I needed a lot of extra help.
Yeah.
But you got me there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Stuart, do you want to say anything, or Suzanne, anyone else? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, I have a comment. We have a meeting next week of the environment team. So the Beth Am members who are here are welcome to join in.
Right.
Okay, very good.
Next Wednesday, same time, 7 o'clock.
Okay. Very good. Thank you all very much.
Anyone
Thank
who wants
you.
to join, the link is in
Alan, good to
the
see you,
Google
Alan.
Calendar on
Say
our
hello to
website.
Fran.